What Naruto is from Demon Clan with infinite potential. Subscribe my channel, like this video, and let's start, guys.
The Baal clan, one of the 72 pillars of the underworld and the highest ranking among them. The Baal held the rank of Great King. Being born into the clan guarantees you and enjoying the finest devil society has to offer. Or so that's how it goes if you met two conditions. Those conditions being that you inherit the clan's famous power of destruction. This grants the users immense explosive power that can completely annihilate things when used. The second condition is to be a part of the main family. If you fulfilled both of those conditions, then you're almost guaranteed everything your heart desires. However, if you're unfortunate enough to not meet those conditions, you're worth less than garbage in their eyes, some deeming you not even worthy of the ground UW. The Baal clan has always been big on tradition, more so than the other clans. Their belief is that if you don't possess their abilities, you're better off dead than being a Sosha. With them, two such examples of clan members who weren't fortunate enough to meet the conditions were Saraorg Baal, the son of Lord Baal, who was recently sent away along with mother for not having inherited the power of destruction. The second was a young blonde of 8 years old by the name of Naruto, the only son of the now deceased Minato and Kushina of the Baal clan branch family. Like Saraor, didn't inherit the power of destruction and was essentially non-existent to the main members of the clan. However, unlike his fellow clan member, he wasn't sent away to on the properties like Saraorg had been. No, he wasn't that lucky, unfortunately. When he had asked why this was, all he was told was that Lord Baal owed someone a favor. That was that. Not everyone treated him harshly though. Some of the maids of the family were kind enough to keep him well fed whenever they had a chance. Anything more than that, they'd potentially be discovered and punished. But for Naruto, that wasn't enough to offset being treated like he didn't exist for something he wasn't born with. What was worse was that while all the other kids his age were out getting their evil piece sets from Ajuka Beelzebub, one of the current Satans, all he could do was read science books the clan didn't care for nor maintain. It really pissed him off. Why couldn't he have his own peerage? Even Saraorg, who was considered a failure, got 1p. Him being shipped off. So what if he couldn't use that damn power? He could still be strong. He'd ask them to teach him how to use magic, and with that he could be strong and not disgrace th. Name like they were afraid of. Their response? He wasn't worth the effort. Even if he learned magic, he'd still be a Baal without the clan's signature ability. Damn them, Naruto said angrily as he glared at the mattress he was currently sitting on. His small hands curled into fists as he remembered all the conversations. Tim even tried to initiate a conversation, he was told to head to his room. He was honestly surprised he even had a room. Granted, it was a room at the furthest end of the Ma. A wing almost nobody visits, but still a room. Damn them, he yelled as he began punching the bed with everything he could muster. After 5 minutes of abusing his mattress, he stopped to take a few deep breaths. Righted himself and tried to calm down, but found it difficult. Looking up, his attention was drawn to an old drawer that had been in the room since it became his. I'll show T. All. At that point, something inside him changed. Almost instinctively, he swiped his hand horizontally in the direction of the dresser and watched in awe as the old dresser was sliced clean in half. He looked down at his wondering what he'd just done. His hand didn't look any different. There was no magic circle in his hand or anything of the sort that could have caused what had happened. He closed his eyes and focused, trying to recreate the feeling he'd felt when he did it. After 10 minutes, he suddenly felt it. It was almost as if he was holding more solid eye. Opening his eyes, he noticed the space around his palm was slightly distorted. Using his free hand, he tried to touch it and noticed that his hand would stop advancing the MIT touches the distorted space. He tried to push a little harder to no avail. All that happened was the slight flashes of purple and green when there was contact. It seemed the closer he tried getting his hands to touch, the harder it became. Almost as if his hand was somehow slowing down. Unknown to him and the rest of the supernatural world, the moment he unlocked this ability, the balance of power in the world shifted dramatically. XXXXXXX 4 years passed since Naruto unlocked what he believed was his innate devil ability, which he named Infinity. In that time, he's made leaps and bounds with it in secret. The power of destruction, which radiated power that drew everyone's attention, Infinity was much more discreet, which gave him the advantage of training to his heart's con. He'd learned how it worked and how to control it. With it he could increase his speed, which he practiced in the dead of night to make sure he wasn't seen. Distort reality, L. did with the dresses 4 years ago. He even learned how to suspend himself in mid-air by manipulating the space around him. What he was most proud of, however, were the techniques he was currently working on. He'd found a way to create techniques that brought divergence and convergence infinity into reality to create devastating techniques. Those science books he read all those years ago really came in handy. Specifically those books relating to space and GTHE Bale clan messed up having those available to him. He never practiced them at the clan manor, of course, nor did he do it when Lord Bale or the family was around in being discovered before he was strong enough. Instead he'd leave the manor and train in a secluded area far off in the devil countryside. Thankfully no one bothered to look for him. Training with his power wasn't the on. That had happened. One day he stumbled upon a gold mine. While he was training in a no longer used storage room, he found a rather interesting looking chess set and old date books on basic devil magic, which is how he was able to train in areas far away from the manor and prying eyes. He knew what the chess set was the moment he laid eyes on it, as he could feel the aura radiating off of it. It was light, but enough to be felt. It also looked different than tones he'd seen others with. This one looked older and the pieces were different in their design. He figured they must have been there for a while considering the amount covering the pieces. It wasn't how he imagined getting an evil piece set, but he wasn't complaining. It wasn't difficult to figure out how they worked either. He asked one of the maids that was nice to him, and she, knowing he never got a set, decided to humor him after her his best pleading look. She explained the ins and outs of the set and how they were used to reincarnate others to help boost the devil population. He also made sure there were other types of sets, to which she responded that there were. What she described was exactly what he'd found. Naruto had come across one of the first evil piece sets Ajuka had created. Apparently some sets had side effects and the clan refused to use a potentially faulty set. Those were their own words. Instead they kept it stored away until the sets were later refined. The maid also told him that those are no longer created and that an old friend of hers died not too long after. Looking into why exactly the sets were completely overhauled. After that last bit she claimed you left him alone. After the explanation it only left Naruto with more questions than answers. Following that he made sure to hide the set and continue his secret training. He'd also made up his mind that he was going to leave the underworld for a while. The moment discovered the evil piece set, the thought had plagued his mind. He'd leave the prejudice underworld and form the strongest peerage he could. Then he'd come back and show the Bale clan and everyone who thought like them, meaning almost all of the older families minus one or two, what real power looked like. Thought of the underworld losing their shit at the fact that one of the failures of the Bale clan was one of the strongest was what drove him to continue his harsh training. Was right now, for instance. Naruto had just managed to complete another new technique after days of rigorous training and was working on another. His body hurt, he was tired, and his palm was burned from all the concentrated demonic energy he focused in that area. If he wanted his plan to come to fruition, he needed to work through it. As he was about to try again, he stopped when he looked at the small clock he had nearby. Oh shit, it's almost starting, he said to himself. He summoned a magic circle on ground and sat back as it projected an image in the air. He was really glad he'd found that old book, even if it was outdated. Not only was this basic spell good for transport, but broadcasting too. The broadcast he was interested in today was for a raiding game. It featured the current rank 2 devil Roigan Belphegor and someone he wasn't familiar with from the Agora family. Currently the broadcast was showing the people in attendance, seeing as the game hadn't started yet. Normally games are broadcasted only, but on occasions when highly anticipated matchup is happening, in-person attendance is allowed. Though they watch the actual match from a broadcast within the room, those allowed in got to with the competitors both before and after a match. The image of the stage flashed for a minute before changing to show 2 of the 4 current Satans. Sears X Lucifer and Ajuka Beelzebub, the only 2 among them that classified as super devil due to their immense power. Though they were definitely imposing figures, his eyes were drawn to the person standing behind and to the right of Sears X. She was a young-looking woman that could pass off for being in her 20s. She had long silver hair, a long braid on each side with small blue bows at the ends, while th was let down which ended in twin braids. She had light red eyes and wore a blue and white maid outfit that, even someone as young as him could see, really hugged her f. Well, she was easily the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Graphia Lucifuge, he'd heard about the woman but had never seen her. All he knew was that she was the maid foe. Sirzex and his family. Most believed that they were married, but that was disproved when the man himself said he was married to someone else. Even though she was simply standing there with an expressionless look on her face, he was captivated. Unfortunately for the young man, the stage was ready and the IMOG changed to the competitors all getting in their respective positions. He was even more disappointed, however, when the match actually began. He thought someone challenging Belphegor must have had some power or strategy to be confident enough to try him. That didn't seem to be the case, as within the first 10 minutes Roygan was dominating the game. He stopped the broadcast and stood up. He couldn't watch that any longer. Might as well continue training. He murmured to himself. I'm close, I can feel it. I can't work here though. He once again summoned a magic circle, but this time used it. Teleport himself away. He reappeared in the same secluded field he'd been using for the past couple of years. It was the perfect place to work on his more powerful Tekken. Naruto closed his eyes and brought his right hand up, palm facing upwards, and took a few deep breaths. Here we go. He began channeling energy and felt the space around him begin shifting. If one were to be there with him, they'd see 4 beams of red light begin to spiral around his palm until they reached a single point above it. A small red formed and began glowing brightly. The blonde could feel himself starting to sweat and began to feel himself losing it. Oh shit, he yelled as the energy became unstable within the bright side. She did keep her word. The Bale clan still believed him to be powerless. It made his day-to-day life at home infuriating, but it worked out well for him. He was still overlooked and ignored for the part. On occasion Lord Bale would see him and condescendingly ask how he's doing. It took every bit of willpower not to erase him from existence. All of that wouldn't matter anymore though, as he was completely ready to head out. He'd originally planned on leaving the underworld 2 years ago but reconsidered. Maybe strong. He knew that if he wanted the strongest members to be in his peerage, they would need an incredibly strong leader. So he postponed leaving until he felt he'd a level that could be taken more seriously by potential members. Now that he had much better control over his abilities, he knew it was time. He took a look at his room for what would be the last time, checking to see if there was anything important to take with him. Apart from the clothes on his back, no, there wasn't. He summoned his magical circle, which he'd since changed to have a swirl pattern, and disappeared. 8 years later. Kuo. Well guys, I think it's just about time we call in that favor from Rias, don't you? The now 24-year-old Naruto asked the other 2 occupants of the room he was in. Will it take long? One of the 2 men replied. Though by the sound of his voice one could tell he was young. I have a club orientation I need to attend. It shouldn't, Naruto replied. If it looks like it will, I'll have one of the others take you. What club did you join anyways? The boy hesitated before answering. The Body Improvement Club, he answered, hoping they wouldn't laugh. They didn't. Sounds good to me. The other man replied. I wonder how they'll react seeing me in the underworld. If we're lucky, maybe a battle will break out. He added with glee. Probably not, but we never know. Well then, let's go. The 3 disappeared via magic circle and reappeared a second later within the halls of what appeared to be a prestigious school. Luckily for them though, no one was Arrow. This time, since classes had ended about an hour ago. I was kind of worried that someone would still be here. It'd be a pain having to wipe their memories. Naruto commented. He knocked twice on the door until a female vow them to enter. The trio walked in and the blonde took a second to inspect the room as they approached the woman. It was a Victorian-themed room with a large desk near wall, 2 small couches facing each other with a small coffee table separating them. Though that wasn't what drew the eyes of whoever visited. Why is there a shower in this room? The youngest of the 3 asked. When you're in charge of a portion of a city and your brother is one of the most important figureheads of the underworld, you can have almost anything you want. Naruto replied. Hello again, Naruto. All 3 men's attention went from glancing around the room to the person sitting behind the desk. She was a young woman of about 17. She wore standard Kuo High School women's uniform, which consisted of a white long-sleeve shirt with a black ribbon on her shirt collar, along with a small black cape draped over H. shoulders. One of her most distinct features, however, was her long crimson hair. The other being the size of her chest, which seemed like it gave the shirt trouble containing. Name was Rias Grimori, heiress of the Grimori clan and younger sister of Sears Lucifer. She wasn't alone, however, as standing beside her was another young woman who wore the same uniform as Rias. Though she had long black hair that was done in upon it, being held in place by an orange ribbon. Unlike Rias, she had a teasing look on her face. He didn't know if that was a facade or if it was always like that. This is Rias, Queen. Himahima. I'm sorry, but I don't know your companions, she said, looking over at the two men besides him. Rias. Akano. Naruto nods in acknowledgement. These two are a part of my peerage. He motioned to the younger one on his right-hand side. This is Shigeo Kageyama. I'll call him Mob. He's one of my pawns, he introduced. The boy looked like an ordinary middle schooler dressed in the typical black button-up and matching black pants. Nothing that would make him stand out, as his face was blank as can possibly be. The young man bowed slightly to the two women in greeting. This here is one of my strongest members and one of my knights. Perhaps you've heard of him, Grimjow Jagerjakas, he said, motioning towards the much taller peer member. The man was much taller and muscular than his fellow peerage member and looked much different as well. He had blue hair and blue eyes, and wore a black sheer. Most of the chest open, revealing a red scar, all underneath an open white jacket with the sleeves rolled up to just below his elbows. Two white belts were fitted at his waist, keeping his pants up, the other holding his katana on his left side. The most noticeable thing, though, was the bone-like fragment sitting on the right side of his jaw and gray markings below his eyes. The two young women looked at the man before shaking their heads negative. Sorry, but no. Inwardly, Naruto shook his head in disbelief. They really didn't keep up with what goes on in the world. Anyways, I'm surprised to see you here today. Did you need Someth? She asked, breaking him from his thoughts. Yes, actually. I'd like to call in that favor from the other day, he explained casually as the three took a seat. Rias nodded and sat up a bit straighter in her seat. Very well. I'm a woman of my word. What would you like? She asked curiously. I need an audience with your older brother within the next 2 hours. By the look on her face, it was clearly not one of the things she imagined he'd ask for. While I'm grateful that you helped me secure a powerful member into my peerage, I don't think that warrants an audience with one of the Satans. He's a very busy man. There. Anything else you'd like? Money, perhaps? She asked, hoping something would catch his attention. Naruto leaned back into the couch, a pensive look on his face. He rubbed his chin in thought and snapped his fingers when he got an idea. How about a wager? The Red H looked intrigued and motioned him to continue. How about you and your peerage take on Mob? If you win, I'll give you one of my peerage members, but if I win, you call Y brother and let me talk to him. I'll arrange everything myself, he offered, knowing damn well they wouldn't beat him. The two women glanced at each other before looking at Mob at the same time. You can tell your brother I have news concerning the infinite dragon god. I'm sure he'll be interested in meeting with me, he said, gaining their attention briefly. They went back to staring at the young boy, who stared back with a blank look on his face. The king and queen duo smiled at the same time and nodded. Very well, we can do this out back. I'll summon the rest of my peerage and we can do this. The blonde nod motioned for the two men to follow him out. Once we're done here, you can go back and get ready for your club meeting. Mob smiled and nodded, eager to start improving himself. Within 5 minutes, the rest of Ripeerage was assembled and stood before them. There was a young brown-haired boy who wore the male version of the school uniform. Though he didn't attend the school, Naruto was sure that having a red shirt underneath the school blazer had to be against the dress code. The boy finished the look with matching black pants and shoes. Next to him was another young man, though this one was a blonde who had a more confident look on his face. He too wore the boy's uniform, though he actually wore it prop. White short sleeve button up and black pants and black shoes. If the swords being conjured around him were any indication, he'd say this was her knight. Finally, the shortest member of her peerage by far was a young-looking girl with white hair styled in such a fashion that it looked like she had cat ears. Her yellow eyes also A cat-like impression. Other than not filling out her uniform like the other two women, she wore exactly the same thing as them. Allow me to introduce you to my peerage. Rias began. You've met Issei. She motioned to the brown-haired boy. Yuto Kiba, my knight. Kaneko Tuho, my rook. A pleasure. Naruto greeted. Now if you don't mind, could we get started? Mob here has a club meeting to attend at his school and I'd hate to be the reason he's late. Rias nodded and stood in front of her peerage while Naruto and Grimjow stepped back a few feet. You think they'll make the kid try? Grimjow asked in a bored tone. Stuffed his hands into his pockets. He observed every member of her peerage and not one managed to impress him. Naruto smiled as Mob looked back to give them a thumbs up. Not even a little bit. Everyone ready? Begin. The first to attack was Issei, which considering he'd only been a devil for a few days, impressed him slightly. But that confidence to attack was the only thing that impressed. No doubt he attacked because he didn't see Mob as too big a threat considering his small stature. A reasonable, if not incorrect assumption. Though Mob didn't have an imposing figure, he was by no means weak. He has powerful telekinetic powers which were actually one of the reasons he ended up joining his peerage. The poor boy lost control one day when in an emotional state and his body couldn't handle the pushback. Naruto offered the boy a second chance to live in exchange for his help and the boy agreed. Mob tilted his head aside as Issei threw a sloppy punch and placed his hand on his back when the boy's momentum kept him moving forward. Mob's hand glowed for a spli second before Issei was violently tossed through the air hard enough to knock over a tree and slam into another one. Everyone looked over to see that the poor boy wasn't getting back up. The brief movement of his chest told them he was alive, so they continued. There's one down, Naruto commented. Kiba was the next to attack. The difference in speed was on clear display as he dashed towards Mob much faster than Issei and SL. Horizontally. The black-haired boy ducked and racied his arm towards Issei before swiping at the air. Issei once again soared through the air but was caught by Kiba, who had to stop his second slash to make sure his friend wasn't hurt even more. In his distracted state, Kiba noticed his tie begin to glow and wrap around his neck and start to squeeze. Without even turning his head, he raised his hand and caught a punch from the woman's rook. Luckily he now had devil strength reinforcing his body as the blow was strong enough to crack the ground beneath him. It's almost sad to watch, isn't it? Grimjow asked rhetorically. A middle schooler is making quick work of them. You'd think someone related to a Satan would have strong members with them. Naruto nodded as he watched Mob continue to simply catch the young girl's attacks while continually choking Kiba. It's to be expected, really. He chuckled watching the tossed aside. She's focused on getting out of an arranged marriage from what Saraorg told me. The blue-haired man scoffed. She's gonna end up paying for that in the future for not focusing on training them. Yeah, but it's not our problem. They noticed Mob pull his phone out of his pocket and his eyes widened. It's over. Sure enough, even as Akino and Rias tried blitzing him. Lightning and the power of destruction, it was a futile effort as with the bare minimal effort, he held his hand out and blasted them away. Kid didn't even move from where he started. Grimjow muttered to himself in disappointment at what he'd just witnessed. Naruto shook his head as well. Do me a favor and take Mob to his club and then meet up at the house. Gather everyone. The man nodded but grumbled something inaudible while Naruto walked over to the downed redhead. You all right there? Man, you guys got roughed up. He teased. We got beat by a middle schooler. She said in embarrassment. Was he trying at all? She asked, hoping to get some of her dignity back. Oh no, not at all. Oi Mob. Before you go, what percentage were you on? Naruto questioned. About 3%. The boy replied before disappearing with Grimjow. Naruto looked back at the now mortified woman. Yeah, that's pretty sad. Anyway, mind getting in touch with Lucifer? Rias huffed. Fine. She brought her hand up and summoned a small red magical circle that she then put up to her ear. She didn't speak for well over a minute and he begged. Think maybe he'd have to find another way to get the man's attention. Luckily he didn't have to dwell on it for long as the woman began speaking. Please stop, you're so embarrassing. She complained into the circle. No, I have someone here who says they need to speak with you about Office. Naruto looked on as became silent and asked if he was still there. She held her hand out and the circle began to glow before a voice came through. Can you hear me? The voice of a man rang out. We can. Great. However, you happen to have me at a disadvantage. You know my name, but I don't know to whom I'm speaking with. Naruto Bale, though I've since abandoned that name and go by Uzumaki these days, he answered, ignoring Ria's shocked look at the mention of his name. A pleasure. Now, I was told you had information regarding Ophis. That's correct. Though, would it be possible to have this conversation in person? The information is quite sensitive, and there is another matter entirely I'd like to discuss. I should have an opening in about 2 hours or so. If that works for you, I can arrange my Queen Graphia to pick you up from the academy. What luck that in 2 hours HHAVE an opening. That's perfect. Though, would you mind if I brought my peerage along? It shouldn't be a problem. Well then, I'll see you here. The circle disappeared from Ria's hand and he stood up from his crouched position. He looked to see everyone finally regaining their bearing and beginning to stand up. Well, it looks like you guys are alright. I'll see you around. Giving them a small wave, summoned his own magical circle beneath him and disappeared. He reappeared in the center of a giant living room of the compound he'd purchased here in Kuo. It was a giant 3-story mansion that easily housed all of his peerage members. Plus, there were still other buildings around that were used for training, storage, and anything else they might need. Speaking of peerage members, didn't I tell him to gather them? Naruto said to himself, slightly annoyed that they weren't here. Oi, everyone down here now. Within seconds, all of his pieces were in attendance. Everyone was either taking a seat on one of the many couches around the TV or standing in the case of Grimjow. He wanted to smile in glee. It was finally time for him and his peerage to make their underworld debut. He was excited to see how they would react to certain members. 'Twould for sure throw a fit. He glanced at everyone, making sure he had their complete attention. First was his knight Grimjow Jagerjakas. Labeled a triple S class criminal by the yokai faction and was one of the most powerful yokai born in recent years. Next was his second knight and one of his more calm and collected members, who was currently sitting down drinking a cup of tea. His attire consists of a wide-brimmed BL hat decorated with a large plume, and a long, open black coat with no shirt underneath, with red, flower-patterned sleeves and collar. He has a small golden cross necklace hides a small dagger. He has light purple pants tucked into a pair of black boots. The most eye-catching thing about him, however, was the giant black blade that rests on high. Though at the moment it was leaning against the couch, he was a wandering swordsman looking for a good challenge. The humans he faced didn't last a minute against him, and the few supernatural swordsmen he fought didn't. Much better. He originally declined the invitation to join, but after being told of master-class swordsmen that the stronger devils had in their peerage, he agreed. He hoped a challenge and trusted Naruto would get him one. His name is Dracul Mahawk. Next up was one of his shorter, more cheerful members. A young magician blessed with great magical power. The downside was that she could only cast one technique, the being an explosion. Because of that, she was deemed useless by her peers and was excommunicated from the magician faction. She set out to get stronger and prove them wrong. She had the look of a cartoon witch. She wears a black cloak with a gold border, a black choker, and a red long-sleeve dress that stopped just below the waist. Onu is bandaged and the other had a black high sock. She had her own notable trait, that being the eye patch covering her left eye. She claimed it sealed her power, but ever knew she thought it just looked cool. Her name is Megaman, his bishop. The next woman was his second bishop. Unlike her younger counterpart, she was taller and older. She wore very revealing clothing for which she was often berated by a not member of the peerage. She wore a pair of thigh-high purple socks along with a pair of matching purple panties. She had a small purple vest that covered her breasts, and light fur at the neck as well as purple gloves. She had short black hair and gold eyes along with a mysterious aura about her. Like him, her ability was also called Infinity, though it worked in a different sense. Her spells could last forever after being cast. She accepted his offer of joining as Shisawa, rare individual due to his abilities and the mystery surrounding them. Her name was Merlin, one of the strongest mages alive. Next was his first rook, a rowdy and short-tempered woman who was always looking for the next fight. She had overwhelming fire magic that could put even a volcano to S, which has only been further enhanced with her devil piece. She usually liked to form her attacks into the shape of feline animals such as lions, panthers and cheetahs, and even able to completely engulf herself in fire to increase her physical abilities. She was an average-sized woman with blue eyes and long, wavy vermilion-colored hair. Her interesting features were red markings accenting her eyes and one sharp canine tooth sticking out her lip. She wore a white tunic, covered by a long dark blue shirt with keeping the sleeves long with a high collar. She wore a purple sash around her waist with white trousers, with her wearing a long red cape. Her name was Marioliona Verm, a ferocious and dangerous fire mage. Next up was his second rook, an extremely dangerous human-turned-devil. He used to be a mercenary for hire and one of the best blacksmiths in the world. Enough where was able to imbue a 6-foot-long greatsword with magic where it was able to kill angels, fallen angels, yokai and devils. He joined because he was betrayed by his best furry, who proceeded to rape then kill his girlfriend while he watched then tore out his eye and cut off one of his arms as a reminder. The man was 6 feet 5 easily being one of the tallest members there while he had short spiky black hair resembling a crew cut with a few bangs hanging down, with a small tuft white hair on his head. He was easily one of the most scarred people there also with him missing one eye which stayed forever closed with a scar across his nose and having mechanical arm in place of his flesh one. He was covered from neck down in midnight scaled armor while he sat in a love chair sharpening his massive blade. This was Gut, considered one of the strongest humans in history before turning into a devil and known for his legendary dragon slayer sword and berserker armor that gave him the appearance of a demonic dog, wolf. Finally there were his pawns. Though they were pawns they were anything but disposable. First was a tall man in a white military-style suit with a double-breasted jacket on. He had 2 red arm bands with a skull on them on each band. He had small bolts in his ear-rings as well as a red mohawk. He was a member of a human faction, named Quincy's, who had the ability to use the spirit energy in the air and convert it into weapon. In his case create devastating fire attacks. His name was Bazard Black, aka Baz B. Next up was a young man of about 17 with two-tone black and pink hair. He was actually killed by his own sacred gear that housed a demon inside of it. Upon reviving him, demon made a pact with him. Once he regains his strength they'll battle it out. If he wins he removes the evil piece. If he loses he allows free use of his power to its host Yuji. The next was a young martial artist with a terrible fashion sense. He wore a green body suit with orange weights at the legs. He had a bowl cut and large eyebrows. As AF magician due to the lack of actual magic he was ridiculed and belittled. He joined after seeing that both he and Naruto were both looked down upon for things out of their sea. Next up was a young-looking woman with long gray hair and a black bodysuit that stopped just above her knees. She was a human hitman who was hired to kill Naruto aft. Cleaned out a casino in Vegas. She was the only member who, because she targeted him, was offered to join him after being beaten down or die. Having given her a good thrashing she agreed saying that she'd get him back eventually. After her was a blonde tan-skinned woman. She wore a short white jacket zipped up that covered the bottom portion of her face and barely managed to cover her breasts. Showed her stomach area. She had short blonde hair that also had 3 small braids. She was a former high-ranking officer of the yokai faction who left after the higher up. Her 3 best friends on a suicide mission. Her name, Tyr Harabel. The next one was an older blonde woman, though her appearance didn't show it. She wore a green robe over a sleeveless white shirt held together by a sash. She had a SM diamond symbol in the center of her forehead that actually radiated power. She was the peerage's doctor as well as self-proclaimed mother as she was always the one bearer members when they acted out of line. Next was another blonde-haired woman though considerably shorter than the last. She wore a pink and white dress and had her hair styled into 2 pigtails. She joined on the promise of being able to collect rare stones that weren't found on Earth. In exchange she'd lend the group her immense power. Her name is Biscuit Kruger aka Bisky. Finally there was his queen. She has very long white hair and possessed white clear eyes, her eyebrows were cut very short and round, a symbol of nobility, and she wore a shade of lipstick on her lips. She wore a white kimono with tomo symbols running down the middle. The most noticeable trait she possessed was the horns that sat atop H. head. The former right hand of God alongside Michael who disappeared from heaven soon after his death. Her name, Kagaya Utsutsuki. So what is it? Baz B asked as he munched on some chips. We're heading to the underworld in 2 hours. Naruto stated simply, It's time to finally start moving. The girl was that easy to convince. Bisky asked as she patted her dress down to remove chip crumbs while glaring at Baz. Naruto shook his head. She refused at first, but we came to an agreement. Mob beat her in her peerage and she agreed to call Searsex. I then secured a meeting. Bedway, clear your schedules and be ready to depart. Tsunade glanced around the room. What about Mob? He's not here, she asked, not knowing he had after-school activities. He has some things to take care of at school. So he won't be joining us. Everyone nodded and went back to whatever it is they were doing before being called. Likewise, H headed upstairs to his room to change clothing. 2 hours later, everyone was ready to go. Rather than his super casual clothes, he now wore a black shirt underneath a black jacket that had fur along the neck along with criss-cross patterns down the front. He had matching black pants along with black shoes with a light red check mark looking logo along the sides. They were all gathered in the club room and were waiting for their pickup. They didn't have to wait too long as a red magical circle materialized a few feet away from them. Naruto noticed Graphia did not look a day older than the last time. He'd say, "If everyone is ready, we can leave at once," she said, looking at Naruto. He nodded and watched as the red circle grew in size until it could accommodate everyone. In a second, their surroundings changed. Everyone glanced around the new area to see lavish-looking artwork along the walls depicting different scenes in history. Giant stone PTHAT made the place look even more extravagant. Were all over the place as well. This way, please, the silver-haired woman called out as she began leading them. Following behind her, the young blonde couldn't help but trail his eyes from the top of her down to her backside. As he stared for a few seconds, he couldn't help but feel eyes on him from either side of him. Sure enough, Grimjow and Bazb had made their way to him and were both looking at him. None of the men spoke, but all three grinned at the same time. They had to wipe those off their faces though as they reached a large door and Graphia turned around. "The Satans are expecting you. Please enter," she said as she opened the door for them. The blonde walked forward but stopped just as he was about to pass her. "Mind if I have a word with you for a minute after the meeting?" After she nodded in agreement, he headed inside, his peerage following behind him. Upon entering, he saw all 4 of the current Satans sitting around a large conference tea with one empty seat available. Whether that was always there or it was put in for this meeting, he wasn't sure. Seeing everyone come in, all 4 stood up. A small gesture they didn't have to do considering their status in the underworld, but it was appreciated. First was the current Lucierzex, who looked like an older male version of his sister. Ajuka Beelzebub, the green-haired genius and creator of the evil peace set. Seraphal Leviathan, former heiress of the Cetri clan and wielder of powerful ice magic. Finally, Falbium Asmodeus, former member of the Glacia Labilas clan. "Mr. Uzumaki, welcome," Searsex greeted. "I have to say, when you said you were bringing your peerage, I didn't expect a notorious criminal, and higher up from heaven," added, looking at Grimjow and Kagaya. "No one does, but they're not all bad. You have my word they won't do any harm or cause any problems." Naruto placated. The Satans all looked to the blue-haired man WHSTARED back without flinching. He looked uninterested on the outside, but on the inside he really hoped he could get a fight with one of the 4 strongest in the underworld. They nodded and sat down. "I'm glad. Please have a seat. Now, I don't wish to sound rude, we do have a few other meetings to get to today, so if you don't mind, we'd like to start." Naruto smiled and sat down. Straight to the point. "I like it. I'll be honest, it's not the main thing I wanted to discuss, but we'll start with Ophis," he said, leaving them slight curious as to what could be more important to him. "I have it on good authority that Ophis has created a group to try and kick Great Red out of the dimensional gap. They go by the Chaos Brigade. The group consists of dev fallen angels, yokai, magicians, you name it, they're probably already a part of it. A lot of them have powerful sacred gears. The Satans could see why he brought this to their attention. A group like this banding together couldn't be up to anything good." The blonde continued, "Chances are most people have their own agendas. In fact, the one we interrogated was working for Kryuzuri Asmodeus. That managed to really get their attention. So the old Satan faction is a part of the group as well." Ajuka began while rubbing his chin in thought. Seraphal nodded, an uncharacteristically serious look on her face. "Chances are they'll begin targeting us in the near future." The blonde nodded at their words. "Ophis most likely doesn't care what her members do as long as Red is out. I wouldn't be surprised if some devils from the underworld are already a part of the group honestly. We can't rule that possibility out. We'll have to discuss this further until we can come up with a way to find out for sure. Sirzex replied. I have a question for you if you wouldn't mind. Falbium said, speaking for the first time. At the blonde's nod he continued. What do you gain by bringing this to our attent? Don't get me wrong, I speak for all of us when I say we're grateful for the information, but what do you get out of this? Everyone turned back to see Naruto lean back slightly in his chair and smile. That's actually linked to what else I wanted to talk about. I'd like to establish a clan in the underworld. As I told you earlier, I've since disconnected myself with the Baal name. There's a condition that needs to be met to be recognized as an extra demon clan, as none can be added to the existing 72 pillars. Seraphal began explaining. That the clan in question needs to possess a devil ability unique to your clan. A condition I fulfill. The blonde replied. You've inherited the Baal clan's power of destruction? Ajuka asked. He shook his head negative. No, I have something else entirely. He replied while holding out his right hand in front of Sirzex. Go on and touch my hand. The two super devils glanced at each other for a split second, a silent conversation passing between the two before the man did as he was requested. Everyone watched in fascination as the Satan's hand stopped a few inches away as an invisible barrier prevented him from making contact. The Uzumaki clan has control over infinity. Sirzex pulled his hand back and was going to respond but stopped as someone walked into the meeting room. As if personally invited, Lord Baal walked straight into the room. If the look on the four devils' faces were anything to go off of, he'd say this had happened before. They all irritated but tried to hide it. Lord Baal, Sirzex said in a strong tone. We're currently in an important meeting. I understand, however, the man trailed off as his eyes landed on the blonde with them. What is this thief doing here? He asked, looking straight at Naruto. Excuse me, Naruto asked, playing stupid. This only seemed to enrage the man further, much to his enjoyment. Don't play coy with me, boy. You stole an evil piece set belonging to the clan before you ran away from Manor. He complained before looking back to the Satans. Sirzex, I demand this failure be taken in immediately. While he and Sirzex began to go back and forth, the latter doing everything in his power to remain calm, Naruto looked to Ajuka, who, as if he felt his gaze turned to look him. Making sure his hand was out of view of Lord Baal so only Ajuka could see, he summoned a small item into his hand. As expected, the green-haired man's eyes widened ever so slightly until Naruto sealed it away again. Immediately the man coughed into his hand twice to get their attention. Lord Baal, I believe because this is a matter between two clan members, it would be in everyone's best interest to let the two of you sort it out amongst yourselves as long one else is involved. Again he shared a look with his best friend, who turned to look at him questioningly after his declaration. The head of the Baal clan seemed shocked by the turn of events but eventually smiled as if an idea had just popped into his mind. Between us, you say? Very well. Boy, call the manor tonight. If you don't, you'll have more than just me to worry about. With his piece said, he turned around and left the room. I take it you two don't get along? Seraphal asked jokingly. The others shook their heads at the obvious statement. We'll begin the necessary steps to introduce a new clan and we'll be in touch. I'll be honest, your ability has me intrigued, Sirzex said with Ajuka mirroring his opinion. The blonde stood up and nodded. Thank you for your time. As they began leaving, he made eye contact with the silver-haired woman, who nodded back to him. You guys head back. I'll see you in a little bit. The moment his peerage disappeared, he heard the door behind him open then close. You've grown. He turned to see Graphia standing behind him, her hands clasped in front of her. Both in body and power. She finished. Naruto turned to face her completely. Once I was strong enough to fend for myself, I was able to leave and train without the fear of being caught. Does that mean you were able to complete the technique I caught you practicing all those years ago? She asked curiously. Completely mastered it. But anyway, I wanted to thank you for keeping your word and not telling anyone about what you saw. I only said it was a kid practicing magic and it got out of control. It wasn't questioned. Regardless, you kept your word, and if I recall correctly, I promised to take you to dinner if you did. I'd like to make good on that. He offered, hoping she'd be willing. Like last time, he was sure he saw a flash of a smile appear before it was gone. Very well. I'll have some free time in about 2 hours. He wanted to cheer but managed to contain himself. Perfect. I can take care of the bail fiasco after dinner. Also, where will we be going? He asked to make sure he dressed the occasion. If I recall, it was wherever I wanted. You'll find out when we get there. Dress formally and meet me at the front door of this building, she said before bowing and heading inside. Once she was gone, he left the building to make sure he knew where he was so he could teleport himself back when the time came. The rest of the day passed by in a blur for him. After heading back home, he showered, making sure he didn't miss a spot, and was currently standing in front of a mirror fix himself up. His 12-year-old self would never believe that he'd actually get a date with the women, but here he was. He was now in an all-black suit with a white button-up S, being the only non-black item. After letting Tsunade make sure everything looked okay and he smelled good, he was off. The young man almost lost the ability to speak when she appeared just seconds after him. Rather than the maid uniform he had seen her in, she now wore a tight white drive that ended just above her knees, along with a pair of black heels that added a couple inches to her height. The dress did a damn good job highlighting her curves. He Thug also couldn't help but notice it showed a nice bit of cleavage. Wow, you look beautiful, he complimented. Thank you. You clean up well yourself. Come now, she told him as she took him by the arm and teleported them to where they would be eating. The two arrived at a gras-looking restaurant where, upon entering, the waiter's eyes lit up in shock. He was clearly not expecting someone like her to show up. The man immediately came up to them and took them to where they'd be seated and told them he'd be back shortly. The two settled in and skimmed the menu looking for something good. Naruto noticed a lot of the items were on the expensive side. Luckily, he'd taken money from any Anstray devils he'd come across in his time away. The two made small talk, going over what they'd been up to in recent years. Naruto explained where he'd been, how he received some of his members, and a little insight on his abilities. Likewise, Graphia also answered most of the questions he had regarding her job and what life was like being in the peerage of a Satan. He was glad that she let the emotion facade she put up drop while here. She was attentive, listening to him as he spoke and asking questions when she was intrigued about something. She even outright laughed when she found something funny. Her laugh was music to his ears. Even after they finished their food, the two remained sitting, simply enjoying each other's company. Naruto had been slightly worried that she'd be blank-faced the entire leave after eating, but thankfully that wasn't the case. This place was amazing, the blonde commented, patting his stomach. You have good taste. It's a favorite of mine, she replied as she wiped her mouth with one of the napkins. Then would you be open to letting me take you out again sometime? He asked, throwing caution to the wind. If he didn't try now, he might not get another chance soon. She smiled. While I would enjoy that, unfortunately my position doesn't leave me much time for a romantic relationship. As queen of the current Lucifer as well as the Mai, deal with many important people in the underworld as well as set up meetings. Today was a rare exception. Naruto tapped his chin in thought. So you're saying if you weren't in that position you'd be open to trying something? I would, she admitted. I haven't been out to enjoy myself in years and this was very enjoyable. I would love to go out again, but my job doesn't allow me the time. She, hoping he wouldn't be too down about it. So all I have to do is have Sirzex release you from both of your positions, he said as if it was the simplest thing in the world. She laughed softly at his nonchalant attitude. It won't be that simple. Apart from helping the Satans with their day-to-day duties, I'm a powerful part of Sirzek's peerage. Won't be willing to let me go so easily. What if he didn't have a choice? He said, raising a finger in the air. Explain, she ordered, now curious to see what he had in mind. She'd expected him to be let down and maybe even a little sad, but this wasn't what she expected. What if he lost a wager in front of everyone and he then had no choice? The woman blinked before realization hit her. A rating game, he nodded. If I challenge him for you and he agrees, he'd have no choice after losing. That's a large task. Why go so far for me after only one date? She questioned. While she knew a lot of men found her beautiful, she didn't know how many of them would willing to go so far as to think about challenging Sirzek's Lucifer just for her. To put it simply, I like you. Not just because you're unbelievably beautiful, but because in the last hour or so I found that you're funny, interesting, and not to mention I know you're powerful. I'd like to see where this could go. He admitted. I'm flattered, she said softly. However, challenging Sirzex won't be that easy. As it stands, only the current first rank of the rating games has the privilege to challenge to a match. Currently it's Dhauser Belial and he seems to have no interest in doing so, she informed him. Naruto sat back in his chair and narrowed his eyes slightly at the information. So I need to take down Dhauser before I can reach Sirzex. Sounds doable. If it takes, then so be it, he said, flashing her a winning smile. One that she reciprocated. Very well. If you believe you can pull it off, I'll be waiting for you. The two left soon after their conversation and headed back to their respective homes. Though he could simply lay down and relax after a great date, he had one more stop to make. He headed back to his peerage to round them up and change back into his clothing he wore when meeting the Satans and teleported to the Bale clan manor. Nostalgic? Merlin asked with a teasing smile. Nah, I hated this place. He moved forward and walked in, similar to how Lord Bale entered the meeting room earlier in the day. To his immense luck, most of the maids treated him relatively well when he was younger were present. If the looks on their faces were anything to go by, they at least recognized him. Excuse me, where can I fin? Head of the clan, he should be expecting us. One of the maids he didn't recognize stepped forward and led them to where the man was. They arrived at a brown door and were told to head inside. Without so much as another glance, the woman left. Everyone stepped inside and saw the man sitting behind a large black desk, a stack of papers sitting atop it. Unlike the Satans, who were courteous enough to stand, before even being told to sit down, the blonde grabbed the chair in front of him and dropped down onto it before crossing his legs. I would say it's nice to see you, but that WBE a lie, he said, which seemed to annoy the man. Look boy, Beelzebub is having us settle this among ourselves. So I've come up with something that can clear this whole thing up. The man paused to take in their reactio. Well, spit it out. Baz B barked at him, already annoyed by the dramatics of the man. He'd already made an ass of himself earlier, this was just making him look worse. The man narrowed his eyes at the mohawk-having man but turned his attention back to the blonde. Seeing as you stole our evil peace set, why not put them to use? We'll Haratting game in a week's time between you and a champion of my choice to represent me. Should you lose, you'll have your pieces stripped and you lot will be executed. Them, not bothering to hide his malicious smile. Who's the champion? As he finished asking, a green clan symbol appeared on the ground next to Lord Bale, revealing a blonde man who seemed to be in his 30s. He wore standard nobleman's ATAND, looked at them with a look of contempt. Just on time. Let me introduce you to the man ranked third in the rating games, Betaz Abaddon. The man in question continued to look at them like they were less than F, kind of like how the Bale clan looked at him most of the time. Listen here brats, the rating games are a noble's form of entertainment for the upper class. Low-class reincarnated devils who don't have talent, wealth, or status have no business involving themselves in the games. Be honored, you'll be sharing the arena with me. Even if it's only to embarrass yourselves. He spat. While the man was droning on, Naruto had tuned him out, instead replaying the words Grafia had told him earlier today. Only the current first rank could challenge a Satan match. If I'm risking execution, then I have my own stipulation. Unless you're afraid your man will lose. That seemed to piss Abaddon off, seeing as he took a step forward. Luckily he was stopped by Lord Bale as Grimjow had already reached for his blade. The man nodded for him to continue. If I win, no matter in what way, I become the new third rank. The man didn't hesitate to agree. Seeing that they had come to an agreement, he stood in motion for everyone to follow. As they left the office, the ever-quiet Mohawk spoke. What an insufferable man. Being in the same room as him had me itching for Dragonslayer. Guts grunted out, glad to be away from the arrogant devil before he did something drastic. I know what you mean. It was getting hard to block out my sacred gear's voice in my head telling me to kill him. Itadori added, I was this close to blasting a hole through the fucker's head. Baz commented as he held his thumb and index finger together to show how close he was. So how are we going to handle him? Harabel asked as they reappeared in their home. The smile Naruto let appear on his face was just as malevolent as the one Lord Bale had shot at them. You guys are going to thoroughly humiliate his peerage while I hand him. The rating game automatically removes you when you're no longer lit to compete. I'm going to kill him before it can remove him from the arena. That's why you said no matter what way you win. Itadori commented. It all made sense now. A nod was his answer. At this everyone smirked. This was gonna be good.